Hey, Rordan, you are live on the line with Promise and Paul. What did you want to talk to us about today?
Hi, y'all, and thanks for taking my call. I wanted to ask or talk about without a God. In this case, I'm coming from the Christian God. Without a God giving us dominion over the earth, and with evolution proving that we're also just animals, there's no real functional distinct or not. There's no real distinction between us and other animals. I mean, there is, but you know what I mean. We are all animals. And with more data coming out about other animals' ability to communicate, and with the idea that, that consciousness is an emergent property of our brain's growth and development, how do we justify like the way that we interact with other animals from from a moral perspective? And to kind of clarify where I'm coming at that, and please feel free to tell me if this is not a question y'all want to talk about after hearing about more of it. It's like, I grew up in a really, really fundamentalist Christian background, and the faith that I have that I'm finding troubling as I am an adult and away from the education and indoctrination system that I am very much still dealing with. I find it very troubling how that's been leveraged to take advantage of so many different people. And now I look around and wonder, how do we think about these systems of exploitation that we have in place, not just for humans, but also for other animals, when we don't have a, heavenly mandate separating us? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially, I guess is your question mostly, why are we not just advocating for veganism?
No. I mean, I guess that's part of it. That is a part of a treatment of it. But it's more like growing up in faith, it was such a clear distinction that we were given, a dominion over the earth to protect and take care of it, both the earth and the animals there. And then, whether or not we were good at it was another conversation. But
Sure,
now it's more like, do we end up in this weird ethical question of like the control that we have over even animals in our home? Like, I don't know. I've been noodling on this for like a year.
Are you currently a theist? I'm just wanting to
yes. I'm actively, I thought I was more deconstructed than I have been. And then I've had a couple incidences in my life that caused me to realize that I was much more, that there was still that belief that things are controlled by an outside force than what I thought.
And so that is so as far as you're concerned right now, that is the justification you would hold to for human superiority or the specialness of humanity. You're saying you're anchoring that on still some kind of mandate from a deity. And are you asking, absent that, what justification is there? So you're asking us as non-theists how we would answer the question?
Yes, Paul. Okay. Thank you.
Now, in terms of evolution, what do you understand about evolution? How do you understand evolution to work? As far as, can you give me? So 8 years ago, I couldn't have given you a coherent answer about evolution at all. I thought dinosaurs were on the ark.
Same.
So,
same.
But I've come to talk to a lot of smart people some of whom host shows here, about evolution. I just want to know if we're on the same page about how evolution happened. What's your thought? Do you believe in evolution? First of all? Go ahead.
I do believe in evolution. I was taught that God guided evolution. And so we never really like I was raised in Christian schools all the way up till college.
Okay. So just to clarify, I'm not as curious about, since you're asking us for our perspective, what I'm curious about is what do you think that Promise and I and other people like us believe about evolution? Can you steelman
that? Yes, that evolution is the system of how life changes and adapts to the pressures around itself, so that we all come from common ancestors that split off and adapted in various ways.
Okay, very good. I like that. That's pretty good. And then there's this weird phrase that is, there's that survival of the fittest phrase that unfortunately is just terrible. It's actually survival of the best adapted to the current environment, of course, right? But within that, in terms of ethics, obviously, biologically, what would be needed for a system like that to work is a bit of this idea of the selfish gene, right? Like that every individual creature, in order for the system to work, must be motivated biologically by propagating their own genes, right?
Yeah.
The whole system doesn't work if it not, like every single organism on Earth is attempting to propagate its genes. That's just part of that common ancestry, was that core code. If there was a species that developed that didn't care about surviving, well, that one would just die, right? Like, so it's just all
right. Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to how do we justify surviving, as we just talked about here, the most core common thing that every life form has is propagating its own genes, and in order to propagate its own genes, we need to have a bit of a circle of, at least in sexual reproduction, you need to have somewhat of a circle of, well, we have to have a population like me in order to propagate those genes, right? Like that all makes sense as far as your understanding. So every single species is in its own way they're showing favoritism to their own species, right? Like that's just a function of how this works. We have to, in some sense, favor our tribe. We have to we want to favor our own children over other people's children, but we don't not favor the other children completely because they might be potential mates for our children, right? Like, so they just biologically, that's kind of built in. So I'm not saying morally that's built in. I'm just saying that, like, if you basically are nodding your head, it sounds like to me to say that species that don't favor their own species don't live long term. Would you agree with that?
A little bit. I think that that's a little reductive because it assumes that there's not benefits received from cross-species interaction.
Excellent. No, you're expanding that circle. Very good. But there is a certain core where you're favoring your own. Then of course the next circle out is you're favoring the things that give you benefit, right? Like, so if I really enjoy eating bunnies, I am gonna want there to be bunnies, right?
Right.
And then that's what you're talking about, right? And so bees very much want there to be flowers, and all that kind of stuff. Like the things that keep us alive or make our lives better. That's the next circle out. If you're looking at concentric circles, right? We have our family, our species, then the things that we like, and of course I think that most people would agree that moral systems, at least secular moral systems, the larger the circle, the more moral it actually is. But I think you were asking how do we justify that there are these circles of care? Does anything that I said in any way answer why we have these circles of care? Whether we should have them or not, that can be a whole different discussion. But does that answer how a secular person would answer that question?
I think so. I guess then that maybe what the root of the question that I'm trying to get at is more of if we should have those systems in a secular frame, there doesn't seem to be or I guess within a secular moral frame, there doesn't seem to be a reason for why there should be a distinction if another consciousness exists. But, well, no, that's reductive, because I don't know what necessarily secular moral frame you would use as an individual.
I have thoughts, but I've said a lot of words, so I'm going to let Promise. Do you want to jump over on the more morality?
Well, the only thing I wanted to chime in is we're saying things like should and all of that, but you have to remember, because we don't believe there's some objective source setting this moral framework, because none of us could prove that. I mean, unless that's where you want to take this call, is that you could show us, you can demonstrate for us that there's an objective source giving out this moral framework. I don't want to speak for Paul, but for myself, it's morality ends up being social agreements that we make based off of the idea maybe that we want well-being, or that we want survival, or that we want consent, or whatever it may be. For me, it's about consent and well-being. And so that's how I base it, because if we play this all the way out, then we're just going to land in well, then why do we even exist at all? How is it ethical for us to exist? Because what are we deciding this based off of, So that's my issue is that I think these are agreements we make in society, and that's how we justify things, because we have to in order to function and live and survive. Otherwise, we shouldn't be here at all if we're going to play this all the way out to not harming anything at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that might be the part that I'm struggling with, is that then if this deity is not there to make the choices, that deity is also then there not there to take the responsibility for those choices. Then individuals have to own their own.
Right, but I don't believe that deity is there making those choices. I do think we're the ones responsible, and until somebody gives me a good reason to believe otherwise, I'm not going to pretend to believe it and bank on something. Where do you get your moral framework from? I would be interested to know that. And how do you know it's the right one?
It's very strongly based in the way I was raised with the Bible. I also recognize, especially after listening to y'all's content, that was very much washed. So
if we go
to
with
answer
the Bible,
your question, Promise, specifically, is that right now I am struggling with where to pull that moral.
Well, let's just say we go with the Bible. Do you remember what Jesus said the two greatest commandments were?
Love no other God before me, and then love your neighbor as yourself.
Bingo. Now, if you're a secular person, you don't think there is a God, right? So then that first one is not really applicable. Love God, Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. But love your neighbor as yourself. We can start with that. So that is essentially empathy, right?
Right.
And you remember the follow-up question the disciple had was, well, Lord, how do I know who is my neighbor? How do I know my neighbor? And then therefore came the Good Samaritan and all that kind of stuff. And you can debate about all that. But if we agree that a great source of, if our moral intuitions can largely be boiled down to loving your neighbor as yourself or empathy, how would I feel? How would I want to be treated? And extrapolating that out. Then the question you're asking really is the same one the disciple asked, who is my neighbor? So I initially was giving the little pitch of why we think that our family is the closer neighbor and our community is closer neighbor than that, and the other species we like, the fuzzy ones, we like those best. My dog is flapping away behind me. But you're asking, are chickens my neighbor, right? And you're asking, are the plants my neighbor? And those are really great questions when you expand out to say, okay, my moral framework, Promise said her moral framework was, it was on
well-being and consent.
Well-being and consent, right. And I would add reduction of suffering to that.
That's great. I'd go with that too.
So if we have those three sort of framework things, which I think align with Jesus's second commandment there, then what you're looking at is how large can I make that circle of the conscious beings or even unconscious beings? How large can I make that circle and still try and reduce suffering and increase flourishing, right? And I think that is the question you're asking and what you're struggling with. And all of us, we have to deal with our own biases and the reality of we can only care about so many things. But I think we generally would agree on this call that the larger you can make the circle of things you care about, the more moral you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it's a valid argument. Like, should I be treating chickens as my neighbor? And that's a valid argument. And what does that look like? And, combined with our biological things, but that's largely, I think you got a flavor from both of us if that's largely how secular people look at these moral questions. And I'm hoping that helped, but please let me know
does.
Okay.
Yes.
And I understand that that's a lot. I'll finish this thought and then I would love to hear your question. That's a lot of work. I get it. But I would be willing to bet that you were still doing that work, even when you were believing the Bible wholeheartedly, because as we all know, we had to cherry pick all kinds of things and progress with society and decide like, hey, owning people as slaves is a really bad idea and different things like that. So you already know how to do that work. But that's part of being human, is having to do that work and having to figure it out. And I'm trying to, that's the beauty also of being secular, in my opinion, is that I get to continue progressing and growing. I don't just have this checklist that I look at every day that stays exactly the same. As I learn more, as I know more, and as I have the ability to do better, then I try to do better. And I hope to continue doing that the rest of my life till I die. That's part of what I apply to meaning and purpose in life, because we also get to do that since we don't have that being dictated to us. So anyways, that's my last little bow on all of that. What was your question?
My question was just if y'all have any additional books or other sources for how you would kind of go about thinking about that framework. I think I would really love to dig more into that on my own and stuff. Do you have any suggestions?
Have you read any books on morality outside of religious books?
No, I have not.
Okay, I started with, I don't know how controversial this will be, but I started with Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape, I believe is what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a great starting point for me that sparked so many more questions that I was then able to go and read other books about different parts of philosophy surrounding that, different books on neuroscience surrounding, I would recommend that as a starting point only because that's where I started. So, but Paul may have way better ideas than that.
That was the one where I started with as well. I just, Sam Harris, maybe not everything that he's ever said is necessarily agreed with by everyone on the show, but that doesn't mean he didn't write a great book about morality. I'm trying to think of the Homo sapiens book.
It's Sapiens, right?
Yeah, Sapiens is also a great book.
That's another great one. Love that. Yeah. That might be an easier read, actually, to start with. Maybe start there.
Who is the author of that one?
That one is by Yuval Noah Harari. Is that how you say his name? I forget. Harari, I think is his last name.
A great attempt, if nothing else.
And also, I feel terrible because I also met him once, and I still can't say his name. So that's very sad. But anyway.
Well, thank y'all so much for your time. I will free up the space for more callers. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks so much, Rordan. Thanks for the good conversation.
Have a great day.
See you.
You too.
Eric, do you want to learn how to Mongolian throat sing? Check this out.
No, I don't. Try. No, keep that shit to yourself. Don't hear it.
Anyway, thanks for watching that clip. Patreon.com/calltheline is where you could support us. And maybe you should subscribe and like the video because it was a killer video. Or maybe it wasn't. Was it a Forrest video? If this was a Forrest video, you don't have to click like. If it was an Eric video, go ahead and click dislike.